Yes, ma'am. Good morning. Bring the committee to order. And before we begin today's hearing, we need to welcome Representative Brian Mast to the Committee on Veterans Affairs and appoint the new chairman of the Subcommittee on Health. And Congressman Mast, welcome to the committee. I know you're going to be a great member. We have 2 new members of the committee, and we expect great work. The committee's had a good year and a half, and really appreciate you serving on the committee as you've served our country. So thank you very much for being here. And before we go on to further business, I'd like to take a moment to thank Dr. Brad Winstrup and Representative John Rutherford for their service on the Veterans Affairs Committee. And both of these are tireless advocates for the men and women and families that serve in the United States military, and their contributions will be missed. And they're moving to, I think, Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce, or no, Appropriations, I believe. And so because they've left this committee, I feel no need for us to send them a Christmas card this year. So we'll thank them in that way. With that, I'm pleased to welcome Congressman Mast, who represents Florida's 18th Congressional District. Representative Mast served on active duty in the United States Army for over 12 years, where he earned several medals, including the Bronze Star, the Army Commendation Medal for Valor, Purple Heart, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. Representative Mast, I'm confident your personal experience with the VA will be an incredible enhancement to this committee's work. Also pleased to appoint my good friend, Dr. Neil Dunn, of Florida's 2nd Congressional District, to serve as chairman of the Subcommittee on Health. Dr. Dunn is an Army veteran and surgeon. Dr. Dunn completed his medical residency at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I believe that Dr. Dunn's medical background will be an invaluable help to the subcommittee, especially as we embark on VA's implementation of the new community care program. With that, I have a resolution at the desk. Members have a copy of the resolution in their packets. I now recognize Vice Chairman Bilirakis for his motion on the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee adopt the resolution assigning Representative Mast as a Republican member of the subcommittees on Health and Economic Opportunity, and appointing Dr. Dunn as chairman of the Health Subcommittee.
All those in favor of the resolution say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Representative Mast, welcome to the Committee on Veterans Affairs, and Dr. Dunn, look forward to the continued good work coming out of the Subcommittee of Health. That concludes our business meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Good morning. The committee will come to order. Thank you for being here today to discuss issues found at facilities in the Veterans Integrated Service Network, or VISNs, 1, 5, and 22, and more broadly, the role of VISNs in veterans health care. Before we begin, I ask unanimous consent that Seth Moulton from Massachusetts be allowed to join us at the dais and participate in today's hearings. Without objection, so ordered. On March 7th, former Secretary Shulkin held a press conference to announce a list of reforms to increase accountability, streamline operations, and remove layers of bureaucracy in VHA. He ordered plans to restructure the central office and to reorganize procurement and logistics functions, both due May 1st, as well as the 3rd plan to reform VISNs by July 1st. Additionally, Dr. Shulkin ordered a targeted VISN reorganization that gave rise to the title of this hearing. He said, quotes, "Effective immediately, we're putting a new executive in charge, Dr. Brian Gamble. Dr. Gamble is going to have direct accountability for 3 VISNs as we begin to redesign the role of the VISNs. Those facilities will report directly to Dr. Gamble, who will be here in Washington. And his responsibility is to oversee and to directly improve the accountability and performance, working with our facility directors to make sure that these facilities are performing up to the standards that we expect for our veterans. What Dr. Gamble will be doing, besides just making sure these 3 VISNs are operating under the correct performance standards, is that a report be given to me by July 1st of this year with a plan to reorganize and to improve the function of our networks," end quotes. These were forceful measures in a crucial time. Inexcusable bureaucratic failures put veterans' health at risk in those areas of the country, particularly at the Washington, D.C., Manchester, New Hampshire, and Bedford, Massachusetts medical centers. Dr. Shulkin was speaking from the D.C. Medical Center in the midst of its highly publicized crisis. Not only did the medical supply chain completely break down, leading to veterans' procedures being postponed or canceled, the most basic functions of the hospital also fell into disarray. Many of us visited the facility last year and saw the situation firsthand. And quite frankly, at that time when I went out there, I was under the impression that things were improving, were getting better. The most worrying aspect for me is the fact that the VISN and the central office knew of the problem in D.C. in many cases for years, yet were unable or unwilling to solve them. I'll wholeheartedly agree the VISNs are due for an overhaul. They should be in the fail-safe mechanism when a medical center goes off course. Unfortunately, too many of them seem to be afflicted with the case of learned bureaucratic helplessness. The VISNs were created in 1995 to decentralize budgeting, planning, and oversight. There were originally 22 of them with between 7 and 10 employees each. Today, there are 18 VISNs with up to 61 employees each. They perform a much wider range of functions, but with some exceptions. They do so ineffectively. Only the VISN director has any real authority over the medical centers within the VISN. Many of the VISN employees view their roles as consultative or advisory. I've had many questions about the reform measures. Obviously, May 1st is already passed, and the central office and procurement and logistics reorganization plans are nowhere to be found. Have these initiatives been abandoned? Secondly, what has truly changed in VISNs 1, 5, and 22 as a result of the increased scrutiny? And how will any improvements be extended to other VISNs? Thirdly, what is the vision for the nationwide VISN redesign? I look forward to reading the plan, but July 1st is approaching fast, and we've heard very little about it. If VA does not articulate a definition of success with measured outcomes, we have no guarantee that veterans will be better off under this restructuring. I held a roundtable discussion almost a year ago with VA and over a dozen private sector healthcare organizations. Every one of them deals with the question of centralization versus decentralization. Most of the large hospital systems have some sort of regional organization. The Choice Act Independent Assessment and the Commission on Care are closely examined. They both closely examine VHA's organization. There are many places VA can look for guidance when considering how to reshape the relationship between the central office, the VISNs, and the medical centers. This committee and the Congress as a whole are committed to VA's success. I think the Mission Act and another budget making historic investments in veterans' health care and the benefits are evidence of that. I have high expectations for these reorganization plans. It is vital to define the goals at the beginning, engage stakeholders, and be transparent throughout. This cannot merely be a public relations exercise to get through the crisis of the moment or more glossy reports that sit on shelves. I look forward to an open and honest conversation today about how we can ensure these particular VISNs and their medical centers live up to their purpose and how we can strengthen VHA's governance so this sort of horrendous neglect never happens again. With that, I yield to Ranking Member, Ms. Brownlee for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing on Veteran Integrated Service Network, or VISN, governance. The organizational structure of the Veterans Health Administration has long been an issue, and I am concerned that the current VISN structure is leading to unclear roles and responsibilities at the highest levels of VA management. We are here today so we can understand how the organization and its leaders, and now lack of leaders, are contributing to the problems in facilities across the country. VA medical centers in Manchester, New Hampshire, Bedford, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., and Phoenix, Arizona all have one thing in common. In every case, VISN and VA central office leaders were aware of infrastructure, care, quality, and patient safety concerns, but did not take the appropriate actions until the IG or whistleblowers uncovered these issues. Take the DC VA Medical Center as the latest example. The medical center, VISN, and central office leadership ignored at least 7 reports that, if considered, could have prevented nearly every issue that was identified during the IG's 2017 investigation. This is very disturbing and unacceptable. Senior leaders must be held accountable for failing to act, and we must take a hard look at the organization from top to bottom to determine what is causing this lack of accountability. Last November, Congresswoman Custer and I requested a GAO review of the role and responsibilities of the VISNs. Chairman Rowe joined in that request because our concern is a bipartisan one. After whistleblower complaints and IG and Office of Special Counsel investigations uncovered significant patient care and infrastructure issues at facilities within VISNs 1, 5, and 22. Former Secretary Shulkin announced that he planned to task Dr. Brian Gamble, here with us today, with overseeing a significant restructuring effort involving those VISNs. However, we lack an understanding of what this receivership or restructuring effort entails and seek to understand what this announcement actually means. We would like you to clear that up for us today. It is our understanding that Dr. Gamble will not, in fact, be leading a restructuring of these 3 VISNs, but would instead provide us a report in June, or perhaps it's July. We are tired of receiving reports. We are tired of inaction. And as I mentioned before, there were 7 reports on the DC VA Medical Center. Senior leaders in VISN 1 and at VA Central Office also received reports on the Manchester VA Medical Center, but did nothing until it became a national headline. If this restructuring is simply a report, then we must ask who will be responsible for leading VISNs 1, 5, and 22 now that they are leaderless. And we must ask when key senior leaders' positions will be filled at the VA Central Office. We must also ask which leaders are contributing to what the Inspector General describes in his testimony as culture of complacency and futility at VA medical centers, where dedicated and hard-working staff believe their leaders will do nothing to address problems, where leaders will not address provider concerns, and where staff must just make do with few resources and a disorganized and unaccountable organization. These leaders should be held accountable for failing to take action. These leaders should also be accountable for misleading Congress and the press. A failure to be forthcoming about patient safety, quality of care, infrastructure, and patient access concerns hurts our ability to conduct oversight, contributes to this sense of utility among providers, and creates anxiety, mistrust, and frustrations for veterans who rely on VA for their health care. I hope today to hear more about what VA is actually doing in response to the top-to-bottom organizational failures that contributed to the most recent events in the Manchester, Bedford, and Washington, D.C. medical facilities. Thank you, Chairman Rowe, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. I'd now like to welcome our panel who are seated at the witness table, if you would. On the panel, we have Dr. Carolyn Clancy, Executive in Charge of the Veterans Health Administration. She is accompanied by Dr. Brian Gamble, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Orlando VA Medical Center. Welcome. On the panel, we also have the Honorable Mike Massall, Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and Mr. Roscoe Butler, Deputy Director for Healthcare, National Veterans Affairs, and Rehabilitation Division of the American Legion. Welcome, each one of you, to the panel. I ask the witnesses to stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And thank you very much. Let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Now, Dr. Clancy, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Rowe, Ranking Member Brownlee, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the proposed redesign of the current Department of Veterans Affairs Veteran Integrated Service Network, or VISN, structure and the status of remedial action at VISNs 1, 5, and 22. I'm accompanied today by Dr. Brian Gamble, Deputy Chief of Staff at the Orlando VA Medical Center. On March 7th, as the chairman noted, former Secretary Shulkin announced VA would undertake a systematic review of the VISNs with a specific focus on 1, 5, and 22. These three VISNs were challenged with leadership and management issues, low-performing facilities, and culture issues. The purpose of this review was to identify VISN strengths and weaknesses and to create a plan to improve VISN oversight, accountability, performance, and strengthen lines of communication and clarify roles and responsibilities. Based on his extensive leadership with the military health system, Dr. Brian Gamble was asked to lead this review and provide recommendations with the goal of informing that redesign process. Our goal is to streamline processes, ensure clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and authorities among all levels in VHA, so that we're functioning in a way that is more efficient and, most importantly, produces better results and accountability. We've also been working with our National Leadership Council to develop a new model of governance to shape the culture and set expectations and requirements for improved care for veterans. Under the VISN model, health care is provided through strategic alliances among medical centers, clinics, and other sites, contractual arrangements with private providers, sharing agreements, and other government providers. The VISN is designed to be the basic budgetary and planning unit of the VA healthcare system. Since Dr. Shulkin's announcement, a team led by Dr. Gamble has visited all three VISNs, and to look at best practices, the team also visited consistently high-performing VISN 23. A resounding theme was a dedicated workforce set on providing veterans with the best possible health care and a clear understanding and willingness from leaders and employees at all levels to improve upon deficiencies wherever found. While these three networks are pretty dispersed geographically, the assessment team found common themes across these networks and facilities, including inconsistency of HR services and hiring, additional emphasis needed on education and training, unintended consequences of management by measurement, leadership challenges including turnover, consistency, and psychological safety and employee morale. The findings from this review will be combined with ongoing feedback and work from the existing network directors in our ongoing modernization effort to formulate the final plan for redesign of the VISNs. One of the key concerns of this committee is the progress at the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center. While there's still a lot of work to be done, significant progress has been made. In March of 2018, as the chairman noted, the Inspector General released a final report finding that the DC VA had for many years suffered a series of systemic and programmatic failures, making it challenging for healthcare providers to consistently deliver timely and quality patient care. To key on a couple of improvements made since the interim report was submitted by the IG in April of 17. Some of the improvement efforts include assuring that all patients were safe and none were harmed. VHA's National Center for Patient Safety launched a rapid response approach with on-site visits, biweekly and weekly calls with the facility and VISN, and assured all patient safety issues were appropriately addressed. We awarded a contract to construct a new 14,200 square foot space for sterile processing, and that will be completed in March of 19. Transition inventory to the generic inventory package eliminated all pending prosthetic consults greater than 30 days from more than 9,000 to 0. Ensured ordering of prosthetics is not interrupted by end-of-year financial transitions, and allocated resources and expedited hiring into logistics and sterile processing service vacancies. We know that how these networks operate is imperative. To get the type of accountability that we need at every place where veterans may seek our assistance and to ensure the best quality of care is delivered, we have to take a critical look at the processes, layers, and leaders to make sure that we don't see the failures that we didn't see at the DC VA. As the VHA and the DCVA move forward, we're putting in place a reliable pathway for all facilities, VISNs, and business lines to escalate high-priority concerns to senior leadership for prompt action and follow-up. We encourage all employees to speak up and raise concerns to leadership because they are an integral part of our frontline safety net, and we take their concerns very seriously. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate this committee's continued support and encouragement in identifying and resolving challenges. In short, there are no missing VISN directors. What we're losing is a past practice of inconsistencies in management and oversight across VISNs and all of VA healthcare. This enhanced consistency is imperative to our ability to achieve the best possible outcomes for veterans envisioned by the Mission Act, which this committee passed and subsequently the full House passed last week, as well as to assure that we get the most out of the new electronic health record implementation and that translates into enhanced results for those who have served. This concludes my testimony, and Dr. Gamble and I are prepared to respond to any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Clancy. Mr. Missel, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Bromley, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Office of Inspector General's report, Critical Deficiencies at the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center. We found that serious failures in leadership and governance contributed significantly to the problems we identified. Since becoming Inspector General 2 years ago, I have made examining leadership and governance issues at all levels of VA a priority for our work, as shortcomings in these areas affect the care and services provided to veterans, put government assets at risk, and allow significant problems to persist for extended periods of time. In March of 2017, we received a confidential source about the DCVA alleging that supply and inventory issues put patients and resources at risk. After a very quick assessment, we determined that patients were at risk as a result of the supply and inventory issues, that these problems were known at various levels at VHA, but that VHA had failed to take the necessary corrective action. As a result, we took the extraordinary step of issuing an interim report. That interim report was issued on April 12, 2017. We continued the inspection and issued our final report on March 7, 2018. Significantly, while we found patients were put at unnecessary risk, we did not find any patient deaths or other adverse clinical outcomes relating to these deficiencies. This was primarily due to the efforts of a number of committed healthcare professionals who improvised as necessary to ensure veterans received the best possible care under the circumstances. Our final report contained 40 recommendations addressing deficiencies in multiple core functions of the DCVA's operations, all of which were agreed to by VA. The more significant findings in our final report related to patient safety include continuing supply chain and inventory management problems, unsafe storage of clean, sterile supplies, deficiencies in sterile processing service, inadequate product safety recall practices, backlogs of open and pending prosthetic consults, and staffing shortages and human resource mismanagement. Aside from the deficiencies that resulted in risk to patients, we also found that the medical center continually mismanaged significant government resources and did not adequately secure veterans' protected information. The DCVA's financial and inventory systems produced inadequate data, lacked effective management controls, and yielded no reasonable assurance that funds were appropriately expended. Accordingly, we could not estimate the loss to VA as a result of the failings identified in the final report. It is clear that information about at least some of the failings at the DCVA reached responsible officials in the DCVA, VISN 5, and VHA Central Office as early as 2013, but actions taken did not effectively remediate the conditions. From 2013 through 2016, the DCVA and VISN 5 received at least 7 written reports detailing significant deficiencies in logistics, sterile processing, and other services. The chronic deficiencies noted in these reports underscore the inability or unwillingness of leaders at various levels to implement and sustain lasting change within various services. In conclusion, the critical deficiencies we found in our inspection of the DCVA were serious and disturbing. While the failures present significant challenges, we believe the greatest obstacle to change is a sense of futility and a culture of complacency among staff and leaders. At the core, the DCVA report is about the breakdown of systems and leadership at multiple levels and an acceptance by many personnel that things will never change. VHA has talented and committed people who could lead the turnaround at the DCVA. With time and concerted effort, we believe that positive change can be realized. VHA needs to recognize the urgency in making strong leadership decisions now to oversee that change. Although the findings and recommendations focus on improvements in the DCVA, the issues raised could be a checklist for other facilities, VISNs, and VHA leaders. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you or other members of the committee may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Missel. Mr. Butler, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. In 1994, the Veterans Health Administration was structured into 4 regions. There was widespread consensus that the system needed a major overhaul. In that same year, President Clinton appointed Dr. Kenneth Kaiser as VA Undersecretary for Health. Dr. Kaiser inherited an organization famous for low-quality health care, difficult to access, and a cost not sustainable for the American taxpayers. Chairman Rowe, Ranking Member Brownlee, and distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of our National Commander Dennis H. Rowan and the American Legion, the country's largest patriotic wartime service organization for veterans, comprised of more than 2 million members and serving every man and woman who has worn the uniform for this country, we thank you for inviting us to share our position regarding the current status of remedial actions at VISNs 1, 5, and 22. The Veterans Healthcare System is the largest healthcare system in the United States. This national veteran-centric healthcare system is centrally administered, fully integrated, and is both funded and operated by the federal government. The purpose of creating the VISN structure was to decentralize decision-making authority regarding how to provide care and integrate the facilities, develop an interdependent system of care through the VISNs. The VISN's primary function was to be the basic budgetary and planning unit of the veterans' healthcare system. However, as we all know, the VISN structure has morphed into an extensive operation consuming more staff, resources, funding, and physical space. Since the birth of Dr. Kaiser's plan, VISN staff and functions have expanded way beyond the original intent of Dr. Kaiser's Visions for Change. Since the creation of the VISN structures in 1995, both the veterans' demographic and geography has changed quite a bit, yet VA has not reassessed the VISN structure to determine if it still benefits veterans. However, in October 2015, VH began to implement a realignment of its VISN boundaries, which involves decreasing the number of VISNs from 21 to 18 and reassigning some medical centers to difficult VISNs. A concern of the American Legion is that VA officials have stated that they do not have plans to evaluate the realignment that is currently taking place. VA actions, according to GAO, VA actions are inconsistent with federal internal control standards for monitoring and risk assessments. Without adequate monitoring, including a plan for evaluating the VISN's realignments, VHA cannot be certain that the changes they are currently making are effectively addressing deficiencies, nor can it ensure lessons learned can be applied to future organizational structural changes. There is no question that VA has endured its challenges. For example, the Phoenix scandal of 2014, the 2017 VA OIG report about equipment and supply issues at the Washington, D.C. VMC, to the January 2018 report of poor patient care at the Manchester Medical Center. I highlighted these issues not to open an old wound, but would rather use them to illustrate that these may be evidence that the VISN structures lack oversight and control and is not living up to Dr. Kaiser's original vision of a patient-centered, integrated, independent system of care. The American Legion believes that is why former Secretary David Shulkin announced his plan to reorganize the department VISN's network. Dr. Shulkin also discussed the appointment of a special team to work with VA's National Leadership Council to develop a network reorganization plan for its 23 VISNs, which is due to the Secretary by July 1st of this year. Mr. Chairman, clearly, Dr. Kaiser's VISN model is no longer living up to the expectations, but rather has gone into a high-cost, ineffective operations. In 2016, our members acknowledged and voiced their concerns about this growing problem. Like most veterans do, they took action and passed a resolution discussing the effectiveness or the ineffectiveness of the current VISN structure. American Legion Resolution 194, entitled Department of Veterans Affairs Integrated Service Networks, urged Congress to direct the GAO and VAOIG to conduct a comprehensive study to include purpose, goals, objectives, budget, and finally, evaluation of the effectiveness of the VISN structure as a whole. Further, the American Legions applaud former Secretary Shulkin for proposing to look into reorganizing the VISNs and the central office. In conclusion, the American Legion thanks this committee for the opportunity to elucidate the positions of the over 2 million veteran members of this organization. Chairman Rowe, Ranking Member Brownlee, and distinguished members of this critical and serving committee, the American Legion is so very thankful for the opportunity to be here today. As Memorial Day is upon us, please allow me to also thank each of you for the incredible work this committee does every day to help those who have already helped us. With that, I conclude my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions this committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. I'll start the questioning by thanking the committee for passing the Mission Act. The Senate will vote on it this week. We've had 7 past secretaries and administrator sign supporting that in both Republican and Democrat administrations. So thank you for that. And I voice some frustration because this committee continues to produce legislation, and this Congress, both Republican and Democrat, continue to produce enormous amounts of money for the VA, and yet what Mr. Missel tells us is that there's a failure of leadership and governance within the VA, within these VISNs that he looked at. And I want to give a shout out to the healthcare people at the hospitals who did the work around these things to help patient safety. I want them to know I appreciate that very much. And I know that the veterans who are served there appreciate that very much, to know that they've created as safe an environment as they possibly can, even with these obstacles. So thank them for that. I want to start by just telling you how my day would start and end when I was in practice. If I had a big number of cases the next day in the operating room folks would show up at my office at 4:30, 5 o'clock, 5:30 when I saw my last patients, and they'd say, Dr. Rowe, we have everything you need for tomorrow's surgery. Maybe you're doing laparoscopic hysterectomy, or maybe you're doing a cancer case, or we've got everything you need. We've got blood available. We've got all your sutures. We've got any prosthesis you need. Everything you need is ready for you in the morning. It's never a question about, never worried about that. I worried about doing my job. It looks like at the Washington VA, the doctors and nurses had to worry about not only doing their job, but running across the street during a case to get things that they needed to take care of a patient. In one case, they put a patient to sleep and then woke them up because they didn't have the equipment to take care of them. That is absurd to do that to a patient. It's risky. Anesthesia is not as risky as it used to be, but still it's some risk to have these drugs and go to sleep. So I want to start just very quickly. Dr. Clancy, look at the VA, the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center, which many of us have visited, and the supply shortages. And we talked about postponing and so forth, but the financial mismanagement, unbelievable to me. Somebody paid $289 for a specula that should have cost $122, $900 for butterfly needles that should have been $251, $8 for these little yellow socks, these little ugly socks you wear around the hospital so you won't slip, that should cost 82 cents. And all of that should have gone through the medical surgical prime vendor and saved a lot of money. And that's my frustration, is we're providing more and more money, and yet we're seeing this. Here's a case where someone rented 3 hospital beds for almost $900,000 when they could have bought them for a fraction of that. Just bought the thing, it would have cost that. And they also, somebody bought $1 million worth of copy paper at the Washington, at 60 pallets of copy paper, and they didn't have anywhere to store it even. How do you do that? How does that would never happen in the private world. If I were a HCA hospital administrator or a hospital administrator at Mountain States where I worked, I would be fired, period. My job would be over if I did anything that boneheaded. So how in the world are we to sit up here and continue to provide these resources? We've got to go back to our constituents and explain them, and we want to help veterans. And Mr. Butler knows that this committee wants to do that. That's just pure waste. Think about it. That's almost $1 million that could have been spent on health care. So, Dr. Clancy.
Mr. Chairman, I'd love to tell you that you got some details wrong or facts, but you're absolutely right. But I think that a lot of what you are saying underscores why we need stronger networks for that kind of financial oversight. That simply was not happening. Now, I don't know entirely, going back several years, whether that is the VISN's problem or the facilities problem. People who want to hide things can sometimes be very creative. We are, as you know, getting a new financial management system, which I think will help a lot. But that is inexcusable and should not have happened, period.
Well, I guess it absolutely shouldn't. And so I guess my question is, when we, and Mr. Butler pointed this out in his history of the VISN, do we need a VISN? I mean, it looks like that I was trying to figure out what the VISN did, and we're here to look at 1, 5, and 22, and I know other members will have some much more detailed questions, but is it necessary? Is that one of the things you're all, maybe we could, we have regional offices in the disability, there are 5 of them, I think, in the country. Do we need to shrink that? The question is, I can't figure out what the VISN does. If the VISN couldn't oversee that, what good are they?
Well, what I think is that VISNs were initially set up, the phrase that was bandied about a lot was laboratories of innovation. And if you achieved the results that then Undersecretary Kaiser asked for, how you got there was fine. Since then, I think thinking in contemporary healthcare has changed quite a bit. For one thing, a whole lot more care, as you know from your own practice, that used to be in the hospital now gets done on an outpatient basis and so forth, which is a very, very different kind of set of challenges. I believe that the VISNs have a vital role and that we are using this opportunity to learn from other industries. I actually consulted with the Chief Medical Officer of HCA within the past couple of days. Dr. Perlin chairs an advisory group for us, and he said the only way you can possibly get to consistency across a large, far-flung system is to have accountable regional leadership so that you get alignment right down to the unit level. So that is what we are trying to build.
Well, my time has expired, and I will now yield, but I'm going to throw this question out to be answered. And what is VISN 23 doing that 1, 5, and 22 didn't do? Just hold your question, Ms. Brownlee. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to drill down a little bit on the chairman's question. So, Dr. Clancy, I ask you to be as specific on this question as you possibly can be. I wanted to zero in on sort of the oversight roles and responsibilities for key leaders within the VISN, but I wanted to drill down specifically on one, and that's the medical director. So what is his or her responsibilities very, very specifically in terms of their role and responsibility to a central office, their role and responsibility to medical centers, and making sure that we are optimizing patient care at each and every one of those facilities? If you could be very specific about that, I would appreciate it.
I just want to be clear, Congresswoman, medical director, there's a chief medical officer at the network level, and then for every facility, there is a chief of staff who is colloquially sort of the top physician. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. The network director.
The network director. Okay, so the network director has a number of key positions, and this we're also standardizing across all of the VISNs. They have a chief medical officer who is attentive to all of clinical oversight across these facilities, frankly keeping an eye on where there are common gaps and deficiencies. For example, sterile processing is an issue that we struggle with, as does much of private sector healthcare, and as well as making sure that clinicians are held accountable and that their training and continuing education is up to date. And frankly, when they uncover unexpected issues, for example, an IT glitch resulting in consults that don't go through as expected, they bring that forward both to the VISN director and also to central office so that we can figure out, is this affecting other facilities and networks across the system and so forth?
So then why did some of these disasters happen in some of these VISNs? And if that's the role and responsibilities, why did it happen? Certainly in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts, it ended up being in the headlines in the Boston Globe, and then there seemed to be some kind of response to that. And we had Inspector General reports. What failed?
What failed was we did not have a consistent job description for network directors in concrete, specific terms that you are asking for. So when I have visited with networks, and I've visited with quite a few and asked them, how do you follow up on these things? What's your oversight function and so forth? Tell me what happens if a facility gets in trouble and so forth. What I often heard was, well, we do the following. For example, we did this, but that's how our network works. We don't know if that's how other networks do it. So we have not had that uniformity. It is fair to say that some of our previous network directors had a much more hands-off approach for a variety of reasons. I think it's also fair to say that in 2018, that is simply not going to be the path by which we assure that all veterans get great care, period.
Thank you, Mr. Missel. Do you see evidence that there has been a streamlining in these roles and responsibilities across all of VISNs?
No, we haven't seen that. In fact, what Dr. Clancy said, I think really was right on point, which is there seems to be confusion about the roles and responsibility of the VISN directors. Let me give you a concrete example. When we interviewed the VISN 5 director, who's responsible for Washington, D.C., he said the buck stops with him. But in the same interview, he said he wasn't responsible for any of the problems that were identified at the facility. So on one level, he's saying he's responsible. On the other level, he's pointing his finger at the medical center director, saying it's that person's responsibility. So I think there's great confusion out there about what the VISN director is supposed to be doing.
Do you think we need VISNs?
I think in certain situations they've been very helpful, but it all goes down to the people involved. If you don't have the right people in leadership, if they're not held accountable, I don't think it matters what structure you're going to have, it's going to be problematic.
Do you think the roles and responsibilities of VISNs can be narrowed pretty significantly?
I think they certainly should be clarified, and then we look forward to seeing what VA comes up with in terms of their study of the VISN system.
Thank you. My time's to an end, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. Mr. Kaufman, you recognize 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one question is, let's see, I think Mr. Missel. So I think in the spring of 2017 on VISN 5, there was a complaint that turned into an OIG report. I just can't see why, and maybe this is to Dr. Clancy as well, why the VISN just didn't respond and correct the problem themselves instead of wait for all the time that it takes to do a VA OIG report. Mr. Missel, why don't you address that first?
When we issued the interim report, there was immediate action by the secretary. He replaced the medical center director at the time and made some other changes. We then continued our inspection. We did see some improvements, certainly not complete improvement, and it wasn't clear to us how much of that was coming from the secretary versus the VISN versus the medical center, and I guess I would defer to Dr. Clancy for more information.
Let me follow up with a second question for you that the chairman had raised, and that was also raised by the ranking member. That is that the structure. What you mentioned, the VISN structure, and I've heard it, and I'm sure everybody on this committee's heard it, that if you've seen one VISN, you've seen one VISN. In other words, that there's no uniformity in terms of quality, and based on the way that it's structured intentionally to allow for innovation, to allow for independence. However, you said in your comment that if you don't have the right people in place, this is not a good structure. Look, I've been on this committee now since January 2013, and the one thing that I've unfortunately found is a lot of times there, for whatever reason, there's not the right person in place. So we need a system that inherently makes it more accountable. And I think if we went to, if we did away with VISNs and sought more uniformity, how much, is there a savings opportunity there in terms of shrinking the bureaucracy, Mr. Mizzle?
I think that's really hard to say. Obviously, VHA is a large, complex, integrated healthcare system. It's important for there to be some consistency. It's also important for there to be flexibility at a local level. And so getting the right governance structure is a very tricky thing that deserves extensive study.
And isn't it true, though, that is the more flexibility we grant, it seems like the more problems that there are when we look at procurement?
In certain situations, that's correct, yes.
Dr. Clancy?
So, Congressman, you asked about what were the VISN and central office doing before the Inspector General issued their interim report. We sent in several investigative teams in a few months prior to April, and frankly couldn't find anything. So what was happening was we were hearing from employees, many missives from home emails and so forth, not clearly identifying themselves with very non-specific issues. So we would send the Office of Medical Inspector over and so forth. Incredibly enough, shortly before the Inspector General issued their report, the Joint Commission said that the DCVA was they did pretty well on their accreditation survey, which amazes me to this day. What the VISN and headquarters had seen probably 2 to 3 months out was that there were glaring gaps in hiring and logistics. And if you don't have boots on the ground to actually make sure you've got the supplies, Dr. Rowe can be waiting to tell people, but if there's no one there who's going to get the supplies, that won't actually be very effective. Since then, we have actually done a lot of hiring. The chief of logistics was held accountable for what was going on there, and there have been substantial improvements.
So when you say the chief of logistics has been held accountable, tell me what disciplinary action was taken.
He was terminated.
Oh, he was terminated.
Yeah.
Okay, very good, very good. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman for yielding, and now yield 5 minutes to Ms. Custer. Welcome back to the committee. You look healthy and well after your little events with a knife, and so welcome back. You look great.
Well, and I want to thank the chair for rescheduling the hearing. My new hip is going great, and I really appreciate it. So I want to stay focused on good health care for our veterans. Thank you very much for appearing before us today, and this is a hearing that I had requested of the chair to investigate VISN 1, but I'm also attentive to the concerns in VISN 5 and 22. I don't want to spend a great deal of time looking back, but I think in order to understand where we are and how to restructure, we need to understand where we've been. So In VISN 1 in New Hampshire, Manchester, VA, we were confronted with 4 operating rooms, one of which was shut down as a result of a 16-year-long battle with cluster flies. So you can imagine the concern there. We had a VA physician that had cut and pasted patients' medical records without updating patients' conditions. And we had a situation that is really tragic of patients that suffered from preventable spinal damage, including paralysis, after the hospital failed to provide proper care for treatable spine condition known as cervical myelopathy. So in September of 2016, a group of whistleblowers presented their concerns to me and to our delegation on September 6, 2016. And forthwith, in September, we referred the allegations to the Office of the Inspector General, and the Office of Inspector General referred the complaints to the Office of Medical Inspector. Since then, we have been aggressively pursuing this, and I want to thank my co-chair, General Bergman, for coming to New Hampshire for an oversight hearing. We appreciate that. We've worked with Dr. Clancy, with certainly Secretary Shulkin. And I just want to point out a couple of places where I have concerns in order to understand the roles going forward. And Dr. Clancy, in response to Julia Brownlee, you said that the role of the medical director is to provide clinical oversight across facilities, and that person reports both to the VISN and to central office. When was then Secretary Shulkin first made aware of our concerns from our congressional delegation, both to the OIG and to the Office of the OSC?
So I believe, Congresswoman, that the New Hampshire delegation sent then Secretary McDonald a letter copied to Dr. Shulkin in the fall of 16. But it was, and I know you and I have had this conversation, to protect the confidentiality of the whistleblowers, general and not very specific about your concerns. I can't speak to what specific actions were taken then. We became aware of the whistleblower case when the case was referred to the Office of Medical Inspector, and then when the Spotlight team from the Boston Globe was contacting the VISN and the facility and headquarters.
And so that's my concern. And yes, indeed, there was a concern of the whistleblowers that they didn't want to come forward and identify themselves, and that constrained our ability to press this. But it causes me concern that it would have to go so far as a Spotlight team at the Boston Globe. Why wouldn't the medical director, who was one of the whistleblowers, have been able to convey these concerns up through the chain? Why would they need to become whistleblowers? Why wouldn't, something as serious as paralysis because patients weren't being treated appropriately, why did it go this far, is my question.
The short answer is I don't know. My hypothesis, with some fair documentation, or confirmation, I guess would be a better way to say it, was that the leadership at that facility was not listening to some of these physicians who were genuinely concerned. There is a physician at Manchester who I know well because I trained him when he was an intern, and so I called him for a bit of a reality check, and he told me their concerns were genuine. He thought incredibly well of Dr. Coyce and a few other people. And I would vastly prefer, which is something I emphasize in just about every time I speak, that if people have concerns, they speak up, and that we can do something about that. Now, sometimes people have concerns, and we're going to take another look, and it won't exactly match what their conclusion was, but much, much better. People calling out problems is the greatest gift we have. And getting into the whistleblower process necessarily delays that for protecting confidentiality and so forth.
Well, thank you. My time is up, but that's one of the reasons why we've worked together on expanding protections for whistleblowers, and I certainly agree with you. We need to create an environment where concerns are addressed at the earliest possible date. So I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. Vice Chair Bill Rockus, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. Earlier this year, I got involved in a particular case at Bay Pines with regard to VA healthcare system, again at Bay Pines in St. Petersburg, just outside of my district, where a group of homeless veterans were in a particular facility there, a building, and there was no hot water, adequate, hot water at different various times, or heat during the winter for a 6-month period of time. And I was notified, and within a week, I contacted Secretary Shulkin, and within a week, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days after I got involved, the Secretary got involved, we remedied the situation. But that should not happen. And I know everybody agrees with that. And then the media got involved, and the whole community was really outraged. So my question is for Dr. Gamble. What types of barriers currently exist that prevent the VISNs from taking a more active role? And what do you think VISN directors need to quicker solve these issues when they arise at local medical centers? Is it better monitoring? Is it more authority? Is that what they need? What do we need to do to help you in this process? Again, I went directly to the Secretary, and we resolved the situation once I was notified. Again, I was contacted by the media, I mean, it's inexcusable for our veterans not to have hot water. They would have to go to another building, outside to another building, to take a shower, which is ridiculous. And then again, no real air condition or heat, for that matter, during the winter. So if you can answer that question for me, I'd appreciate it, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. I appreciate the question. I think it's incredibly important, regardless of where you are in an organization, and again, coming from my time in the military, that it's about leadership. It's about boots in the ground, walking the terrain, listening to the staff and teams around you, to early identify and realize that, problems as they affect our veterans are critical to deal with in an expedient and timely manner. And I don't know why it had to come up through you all the way to the Secretary for action. But again, I think that also states that whoever brought that forward realized that it was a critical need to push that forward. I think that, my travels around the VISNs and to some of these institutions, it really moving ahead, it really revolves around 3 things. One of which is leadership, second of which is communication, and the third is structure, because structure really sets the culture, and I think it has a lot to do with culture and folks bringing these issues up in a sense of confidence that they'll be dealt with promptly and effectively, that really will make the difference going forward.
Thank you. Next question for Mr. Massal. Does your office have the authority to stop the admission of patients to a medical center when you identify serious health and safety concerns?
No, we would not have that authority, but we obviously would immediately contact VHA to take whatever action they thought was appropriate.
Okay.
If I could just note,
Yes, please.
Congressman, that we did actually send patient safety people in a number of times to give us a read. Were they worried? Was the risk of harm sufficiently high that we should actually close down some units or just keep going and until we rebuild the supply chain?
Okay, so again, how serious do these conditions have to be for you to close down the facility and make that decision? Maybe give me an example.
I don't have an example right at hand where we have done that, but for example, in one of our facilities several years ago, they closed down an ICU for a few weeks. The issue at hand was that an acting director came in and inherited a situation where the facility was very, very short on housekeeping on weekends. So what that meant was that the nurses in the ICU were actually turning over beds and having to do the housekeeping and, when a new patient came in. And the director became very concerned that they were making mistakes because they were exhausted. So what she did, which I think was exactly the right thing to do, was to close the unit for a few weeks until they could bring more custodial assistants in for the weekend so that the nurses wouldn't be trying to do 2 or 3 different jobs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Lamb, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Clancy, I just want to ask you some questions about the pipeline for people that become network directors. Are they always promoted from below, essentially? Like, are they always people that were chiefs of staffs of VA facilities?
They're not only 1 or 2 of our current network directors, actually 1 right now, is a physician. Most are healthcare executives and have strong leadership in that capability. Historically, that was exactly where they came from. In recent years, we have begun to recruit as broadly and widely as we can. So, there's advantages to having people who know the system and have had experience, in several of our most recent network directors who I think are really doing a terrific job. We're terrific medical center directors. But we are continuing to recruit broadly and widely.
When you say recruit, though, are you hiring people from outside the VA for the network director job?
We would be happy to if we find a good person. We have not recently, but have certainly interviewed people, and they've been fairly competitive. And I would say we are hiring more people outside the VA to be medical center directors.
Okay, some of whom could then presumably
Yes.
be promoted to VISN director. Okay. Now, several of you have talked about the importance of culture, both making sure that complaints are heard and can kind of rise to the top, but also making sure that there's fast follow-up by the leadership so that things actually get solved. What suggestions do you have for how we actually do that? In other words, how do we find the leaders who are capable of creating that culture and then actually instilling it in the organization?
That's a terrific question, because when people apply, we tend to review their background, experience, CVs, and so forth for their technical skills. And what seems to me to matter at least as much is how engaged are they with the people. When I look at our best medical center directors, they know almost everyone who works in that facility. Now, that's a pretty tall order. Some people are more gregarious than others, but it makes a difference, because if I'm asking you how you're doing and how's your kid doing in Little League or whatever, I have a degree of comfort that I could say to you, we got a problem over here in OR1, and I'm going to guess you may not have heard this, or you've heard that everything's fine, but what I see is not fine. So a very, very big part of it is that kind of being able to engage and listen to people. And I'm noticing more and more of our medical center directors doing this, whether it's a Facebook chat, walk-around rounds. Someone earlier referenced walking around and getting out and seeing people. It is management by walking around is another phrase. Very, very important. So we're beginning to talk now about how do we build some of that into the interview. I think it also helps to bring in others into the selection process, which we're doing now at the DCVA. So the physicians will have a role and a voice in who the next director will be and so forth.
And Dr. Gamble, you were nodding. If you could just address that, and also, how do you get a similar level of engagement and strong leadership at the VISN level? I kind of see it for a medical director of a facility because they're in one building every day, they can meet everybody. But what are we doing to promote stronger leadership and accountability at the VISN level?
Mr. Congressman, I think network directors have really taken the lead recently in helping to develop a way ahead One of the key parts of their guidance and assistance to me has been looking at developing a playbook for VISN directors so that you set up a consistency of roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities. And one of those is really walking around and getting to see your facilities, get out to meet the people. That's one of the key parts of a network. You know, there was in Kaiser's report back in the 90s, there was a notable comment, I believe it was there, that in a network you had the span of control was critical. You really could only have between 8 to 12 facilities to really, as a network director or VISN director, really be able to have that control. And that's, I think, really key for the future, to set those roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities, and also give them a terrain of an organization that they can walk around to get to know up close personally.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thanks, gentlemen, for yielding. General Bergman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of our witnesses here for your testimony. You know, the good news is I'm getting to know you because I see you so often. The bad news is I'm seeing you too often. So the point is the flow of communications, as Dr. Clance and I talked about earlier, as far as bringing in the boots on the ground, the everyday stuff. I'm pleased to see that the VA is going to do that so that we as a committee can hear it from those who are involved in the day-to-day operations. You know, 18 months into this first term now, and in dealing with things that we hold near and dear to our hearts and our veterans' hearts, I am still learning at the cyclic rate. You know, I think VISN 23 touts the SAIL metrics, the strategic analytics for improvement and learning that you've had some success with. I'd like to give you just one data point from my first briefing at an unnamed facility and VA related, but the point is the metric for success proudly touted, well, in a slide, was that they had added 8 full-time equivalents to their staff. I'm not so sure that's the kind of quality metrics that we're looking at, is adding staff. I mean, if that had been related to what that meant to the outcomes and the results for the veterans, that might have had a different quality to it, rather than just saying, hey, we added 8 more paychecks. All right, so it's just FYI. It was meant to be a good answer. So I would suggest to you the leadership involved with that maybe needs to just kind of look at things a little different and what is a good answer as it relates to results for the veterans. Dr. Clancy, I know I've asked you this before, but I'm going to ask again. Do the VISNs have a mission statement, either collectively or individually? Have we got something down on paper, 2, 3 lines, 4 lines, whatever it is?
The goal of our current redesign effort is that there is one mission statement that is for all VISNs. Most have a mission statement, but it's not looked at by anyone, and we don't verify it. And I would guess that it probably echoes the department's strategic plan that says we are all about personalized, veteran-driven, high-quality care, more or less. But it needs to be much more engaged. Dr. Gamble's point about a playbook, I think, is quite instructive.
Okay, Mr. Butler, you know, same question for you. Well, what do you think of the VISN's mission statement? What do you think it should be?
What I would say that the American Legion resolution calls for a study of the current VISNs, and so we advocate that someone look at the VISN structures and determine the lead way forward to go, and whether or not there are changes or improvements that could be made based upon studying the current VISN structure.
Okay. You know, we could talk about this for a long time, and I can see as I look across, I have a fellow Marine. A couple of them. You got me outnumbered now. Not outgunned, but outnumbered. Anyway, Oh, my God, I forgot over here. Thank you. You always got my flank. The point is, in the Marine Corps, every word in a mission statement is a planned word with a specific meaning for what its intent is, so it can flow up and down. And I would suggest to you that at different levels of command, sometimes that mission statement might be revised to the level of command that it is meant to oversee. So don't get caught up on one size fits all. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Craig, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just wanted to thank you, Chairman Rowe, for your leadership in the Mission Act in moving legislation out of this committee onto the Senate. Do appreciate what you've done. I know my veterans appreciate your efforts as well. Thank you, sir. Dr. Clancy, quick question for you. Secretary Shulkin envisioned placing VISNs 1, 5, and 22 in receivership. Any thoughts about what he envisioned?
So I don't think he had completely followed through on the thought at the time of the D.C. press announcement. We did have subsequent conversations.
It was an envisioning, not actual plan. So what?
No. I think what he wanted to do was to say, whoa, whatever a VISN is supposed to be doing in these three networks is not working. Therefore, he had called Dr. Gamble in to get him a set of fresh eyes, informed by a great deal of experience outside of our healthcare system, which I saw as a real asset. But it became clear, I would say, within the first 24 hours that the span of control, it was not possible for someone sitting in D.C. or anywhere else to be running day-to-day operations at 23 facilities that were vastly dispersed geographically. So on the ground, the deputy network director, the most senior VISN official, has actually been sort of an acting network director for day-to-day activities. But Dr. Gamble has been to each of those facilities. Does that help?
A little bit. I guess I'm still at a loss when it's a big health network, a lot of work, a lot of important work, but it's not exclusive to this country. You've got a Kaisers of the world. You've got other large networks that have the same challenges of management, implementation, accountability, responsibility, and liability. And there are some, for lack of a better term, best practices that could be employed and I'm just trying to figure out why is it that we've been operating the VA as silos, and why is it that these discoveries continue to be secrets that nobody knew about?
So I think the last point you made is hugely important. And in the question about culture, I would have said that what's even more important before that is candor, that you can honestly confront your problems and don't act like it's a secret, because frankly, if one of our facilities has a problem, it is highly likely that some other facilities are having the same challenge. And the great power of being an integrated system is that we could learn rather than as a system, rather than having every single facility replicate the painful discovery of a delta between your aspirations and what actually happened.
So, Dr. Clancy, your words, whistleblowers' greatest gift that we have.
Yes.
Do you have a system to listen to whistleblowers? Do you have a 1-800 number, an anonymous box, and do you have folks that follow up on comments, suggestions, complaints by whistleblowers?
So that is done differently at most facilities. Some literally have suggestion boxes. Some will do things like having Facebook chats where people can text in questions. Some have town halls with employees. I don't think there is a magic formula. There
should be a formula at each place. If you don't have a system, then I would question whether you have a system at all in all of these places.
Well, the critical formula for me is saying, if there's problems, I want to hear about them. And facility directors who communicate that generally tend to hear about problems and act on them sooner than not.
So when you have directors that hear about them, the results of these surveys, do they reach Washington, D.C., or are they stuck at the local level?
We have been strongly encouraging more that we fail as a system if any of our individual facilities.
So I guess my question, and I'm running out of time, that's why I'm interrupting here, suggesting, encouraging versus a system of saying this data will be reviewed. The other day, I went to my local doctor. Within a couple of days, I got a text saying, can you tell us what your experience was with your doctor? Can you tell us what your experiences was visiting? Do you have a system like that where our veterans can text in their experience? And if it's a bad one, do we follow up, or that's just another number that we put away for
We have
research
recently
in the future?
put in a system. We've always had questions at the kiosk before you check out, okay? And we have recently put in a system where veterans can give us real-time feedback from a variety of venues. That can be from a kiosk, they can send us an email, they can drop off a note at the front desk, and that information gets aggregated. And frankly, what I'm hearing from our directors is they love it. Occasionally they feel like they're drowning in information, but
we all do.
It points out problems. I mean, in the same way that I'm sure many people learn from their own office staff, right? Things you thought were fine, except what you're hearing from the actual customer or the veteran is it's not working so well for me. And that's an opportunity to just fix that.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to yield before I do this and say, I think we need to figure out how to protect and listen to whistleblowers as we move forward. Mr. Chair, I yield.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Chairman Boss, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, let me start out by saying, I was taught in college about the Peter principle, which somebody is promoted beyond their capability of handling the job, and that's where they freeze. I've got a statement here, and Dr. Clancy, I want to see where you think this should go. In 2008, several congressional members sent a letter to then VA Secretary James Peake, expressing their concerns about an appointment of Dr. Peter Almanoff to be the Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for Health and for Quality Safety. Dr. Almanoff, formerly Director of the VA Heartland Network, responsible for overseeing the Marion VA Center. Dr. Peter Almanoff had oversight authority over Marion VA Medical Center when 9 veterans died due to substandard care. He was promoted to oversee quality and safety for the entire VA in February of 2018. VA announced that he is now the director of VA's Office of Reporting, Analytics, Performance Improvement, and Deployment, or RAPID Healthcare Improvement Center, to oversee improvement at each low-performing health center, and he reports directly to you, Dr. Clancy. I know the VA's center office will review each of the facilities' quality, and if the facility fails to make rapid, substantial progress in their improvement plan, VA leadership will take prompt action, including changing the leadership of the medical center. And this is not the first time of the VA employee getting promoted after they fail at their job. Most recently, we've heard of several concerns related to the quality team in Marion, and the quality nurse was promoted into the VISN. Where's the accountability? At what point do you start looking at your employees, and when they fail at a job, do we either get rid of them or we demote them? But no, what we do in the VA is we promote them away so that they don't have to deal with the problems they create. Do you have any answer on that?
So in general, when people are promoted, we are looking at past performance and any investigations and so forth. I think most large organizations, healthcare or otherwise, that have employees with an enormous amount of skills that are in the wrong job, before they put them out on the sidewalk, would want to figure out how they might be working in a job that's a better fit with the skills that they have.
Okay, maybe my concern, and I've got another question I've got to ask, but this came to mind. My real concern, because, okay, I did not run something the size of the VA, obviously, but I was in business and have been in business for years. The concern is that, do you not see with the amount of employees that you have that some of them might all of a sudden say, okay, if I just do a bad job here, they'll move you somewhere else? Because that's what we're seeing. That's the concern I see. It's, okay, I can't do this job, but I still have an education and a degree, so maybe they'll move me over there and then I don't have to do this anymore. And call it a promotion.
In general, I am not that concerned about that. I certainly don't want someone to struggle in a job that their skills are not a good fit with, that is not serving veterans,
Okay.
if in fact they might be able to contribute more effectively elsewhere.
Okay.
And if, to me, the bigger challenge that we struggle with a lot is an inconsistency in values. People who don't have values that resonate with our intent of serving veterans everywhere.
Okay. My second question here before the time runs out. Marion has a number of issues that have come to light over the past decades. The leadership of the VISN 15, though, does not seem to be adequately addressing my concerns about the morale at Marion. What role does the VISN play with the Human Resource Department, given the unique role of the HR personnel have in the VISN? And is there a way that someone at the VISN that's over HR can explain to the Marion VA HR person how to do their job betterly? That was a great word.
Thank you. No.
More accurately.
Thank you, Congressman. That's exactly the direction we're going with our VISN redesign, is that we will strengthen the capacity and oversight of the HR person at the network level so that the person at the facility level, who's responsible for posting jobs and making sure people get onboarded and so forth, actually has someone to consult with and someone who's keeping an eye over their shoulder to make sure that we're doing a consistent job.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Peters, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer to Mr. Moulton.
He's right up after you anyway, so that's fine. Right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I represent the Bedford VA, as you know, and last week I testified about my concerns with the Bedford VA and the multiple whistleblower cases on issues to include contract fraud, patient abuse and neglect, and poor facility maintenance that have been reported at that facility. Adding to that, there are issues with improper medical record management, a Legionnaires outbreak, the Office of Special Counsel findings of widespread asbestos exposure, a hostile work environment, and retaliation. Now, to Secretary Shulkin's credit, he came up at my request and visited on a Saturday afternoon, and we walked around the Bedford VA and heard their leadership team, or what was left of the leadership team, explain what happened, in particular with a patient death. And what struck me about it is that there was a lot of effort put into looking backwards and figuring out what had occurred, and very little accountability for making sure it didn't happen again. Now, you've heard from a lot of Marines on this committee, and I think of us as all on the same team here, not Democrats and Republicans. But one of the things we learned in the Marines is that of all the different leadership steps, coming up with a great plan, doing the reconnaissance to get the intelligence, none of it really matters unless you supervise what happens. It's the most boring step in leadership, supervision. But you've got to make sure that your good plans actually come to fruition, that the Marines get the job done. And so my question is just, what has been changed? What is different at Bedford and other places, and VISN 1 and elsewhere, to make sure that when we have problems like this, we can ensure that they don't happen again in the future? I recently met with the new director of the Bedford VA. It took about 2 years to get that person into place, and I'm excited for her to get started. I mean, she is getting started. I think she'll do a great job. But I fundamentally want to know what will be different.
So the Bedford VA is not far from where I grew up, and so it's a facility I know reasonably well. And I know that when you visited the first time, there were a lot of problems and, frankly, a lot of publicity in a way that probably makes it a bit difficult for people to be quite as forthcoming, even with respect to legitimate oversight and so forth. I think the biggest good thing that's happened at the Bedford VA is that we will have a new network director in VISN 1, and we are going to do everything possible for these 3 networks, the new people, to actually prime them for success. So whether they are promoted from within or recruited from outside, they're going to have a 2 to 3 month training period, leadership development and so forth, which I think we can learn a lot about from the military. But probably the best thing that's happened to the Bedford VA is identifying and recruiting an effective director. I think she's going to be terrific. And I think what will be different is that you have someone who knows a lot about how the system works, both locally as a very senior nurse at the Boston VA, and then having worked in headquarters for a couple of years, focused on improving access to care.
What is the timeline that you expect from her for addressing these issues?
I expect her to be showing improvements within 1 to 2 years. I mean, that I can count and measure.
So up to 2 years to address these whistleblower complaints?
No. She is not going to address the whistleblower complaints. We have an external, another office in the department that does that. What she's got to do...
Dr. Clancy, what is their timeline for addressing these complaints?
I don't know. I'd have to take that for the record and get back to you.
Okay, very much appreciate
Happy to do that.
Appreciate that. The sad thing is that the Bedford VA also has some extraordinary accomplishments. They have a
Yes.
remarkable record with regards to mental health care treatment, for example, which we all know is top of mind for veterans in America today. And so part of this is ensuring that we have a VA leadership culture that ensures that problems get fixed. Another part of it is that good practices get shared.
Yes.
What are you doing to ensure that good practices that are happening at places like Bedford, which has an opioid prescription rate, Mr. Chairman, half the national average because they're so innovative with mental health care? What are you doing to ensure that those practices get shared?
So we're doing two things. Over the past couple of years, we've had a big initiative focused on diffusion of excellence, where employees across the system are encouraged to submit their best practices, and we actually facilitate their connecting with other facilities, often far away from where they actually take care of veterans. And it's not only been a terrific way to identify good practices, it's been a way for people across our system to learn from folks they otherwise never would have met. Recently, I heard the individual who's leading that effort explain how he's going to actually take that up another level by identifying other practices. In other words, looking at measurements. What is Bedford doing about mental health care that could be shared with others? The Bedford VA was part of an initial best practices which focused on helping veterans and their families discuss preferences for end-of-life care as sort of a group. You could only do that in VA. And it's been hugely popular with veterans because it's actually less intimidating than a one-on-one conversation, and they get to kind of process this with other veterans, which is very helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for letting me run over.
No, that's fine. Thanks for being here today, and thanks for your service to our country. I'm beginning to think maybe we have too many Marines on this particular, they need a few more Army people. And it's got a very New England tint today. Mr. Poliquin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. That, to me, is your lean 6 minutes, Mr. Chairman, but thank you very much. Make sure I get this right, Mr. Chairman. Before 1995, and this would probably go to Dr. Clancy, we have about 160 medical centers around the country, and before 1995, they were roughly all autonomous, and they were organized loosely in four regional areas, but for the most part, they reported directly to Central VA. And how in the heck can anybody oversee that? How can they hold them accountable? So, after 1995, or since 1995, I know you folks originally organized, or we did, 22 VISNs, and now they're down to 18. Is that correct, roughly? Have that roughly right?
Yes.
Okay, and so the number of employees went from about 220 to 1,100. And so to me, what it looks like, Dr. Clancy, is that we've created another sort of middle management bureaucracy here. Mr. Missal, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
It's Missal.
Mr. Missal, you're the IG for this whole ball of wax here. Have you found in your data, in your work, that there's been an improvement in accountability, in responsiveness and care as a result of this reorganization?
We haven't looked at that specifically, but what we do look in all of our work, we try to find what the root cause of an issue may be. If we find a problem, because what our role is and our goal is to help VA get better. And so by identifying anyone who did not act as you would expect, we want to identify it so that VA could take the necessary
Thank you.
action.
Mr. Gamble, you were appointed by Mr. Shulkin to run VISN 1, 5, and 22. How long ago?
I was not appointed to run those VISNs.
To oversee them.
I was to oversee them. That was back on, I believe, March 7th.
Okay, of this year?
of this year.
Okay. And are you stationed out of Orlando, or are you stationed out of D.C.?
I'm still living in Orlando, but I'm up here most of the week. In fact, since March 7th, I've spent most of my time on the road out with these VISNs
Okay.
and facilities.
Okay, we're in VISN 1 up in Togus. We have the first medical facility, medical hospital, VA medical hospital in the country, established after the after the Civil War. Have you been there to visit Togus?
I've not been there yet, sir.
Okay, do you plan on it soon?
As soon as I can.
Great, thank you. When will that be?
I will have to check my record, or my schedule, and
Good, we'll check with your office to make sure we know when that's going to happen. Thank you. There's someone by the name of Mayo Smith and Weldon. They both retired as the heads of VISN 1 and 5. Is that correct?
Sorry, Dr. Mayo Smith was
Yes.
the previous VISN director at
Yeah, they're gone now, right? And Weldon's gone too, right? So they're both
22,
gone.
yes, sir.
Okay, and Williams has been reassigned, correct? In 22. So who are running those three VISNs?
Right now, we have acting medical directors, acting VISN directors in those positions. We have
Okay.
Mr. Barrett Franklin, who's in VISN 1.
Thank you.
We have Dr. Ray Chung, who's in VISN 5.
They're all acting, okay. I want to go back to what General Bergman said a minute ago. What performance benchmarks do you folks embrace to make sure the accountability is getting better, not worse? What are the specific measures? Give us a couple examples.
Well, I've
Sure,
a little
Doctor.
more experience, I'll
Yeah.
take that. So one overarching accountability measure is the performance of the facilities in your VISN better or worse?
What does that mean?
Than it was 1 year
How do you
ago?
measure that performance?
What we do is we actually roll up and summarize all performance measures, the same ones used by the private sector reported to.
Okay, let me give you an example. There was a fellow by the name of Dr. Franchini up at Togus.
Yes.
Dr. Franchini was a foot surgeon at Togus from 2004 to 2010. He botched dozens and dozens and dozens of operations, to the extent that one of our veterans had to have her leg amputated. I repeat that, her leg amputated to take care of the pain because there was no other way to cure it. Now, here's the thing that really hits me between the eyes. Not only did that happen, but it wasn't until roughly 2 years later, 2012, that the former head of surgery who was responsible for getting this out to the victims and also to the public, so Franchini couldn't operate in the private sector. It was about 1 to 2 years until that happened. Okay, you mentioned earlier, Dr. Clancy, that you need to make sure that people have the right job description so their skill sets can fit in another job. This individual was not fired, he was demoted. Is there a job skill that I'm missing here that enables this person to be reassigned within the VA after someone's leg was cut off because of botched surgeries that they did not report for 1 to 2 years? Am I missing a job description here or some sort of skill set that they should allow that individual to stay there?
Congressman, are you referring to the podiatrist or the person who supervised the podiatrist?
The person who supervised the podiatrist.
I would have to take that for the record, because that piece I'm just not that familiar with.
Okay,
I
were you
apologize.
responsible at that time for overseeing the VISNs?
No, I was.
Who was?
Prior to me was Dr. Oleg, and before that, Dr. Shulkin. What I would say, Congressman, and I didn't get a chance to
Okay,
say that.
Steve Young is the fellow that's under
Yes.
you, right? Okay, and then it goes down to the office network, then it goes down to the VISNs, right?
Yes.
But you're the head person, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so you are responsible.
yes.
You just told me you weren't.
No, I thought you said then. I've been in this job now for 7 months,
Okay, and before that, how long have you been at the VA?
4.5 years.
4.5 years. Okay, okay. Go ahead, I'll let you finish.
But I
your
would be happy to get that for the record.
Appreciate it.
What I was also going to say, as a result of Dr. Franchini and a couple of other things, we have put in new requirements for facility and network directors to keep credentialing licenses and so forth up to date, and that is also part of
Do me a
the
favor, when you get
expectation.
back to our office, and I appreciate it very much, Dr. Clancy, we want to make sure the person who's responsible for reporting this, is that individual still there or not? I appreciate that very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Arrington, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Butler, representing a vast array of veterans from various backgrounds, how would you rank in a customer service survey the overall service of the VHA to your veterans? 1 to 10, 10 being excellent, off the chart, 0 being non-existent?
Most veterans that we encounter tell us that the care and services provided by the VA is excellent.
Well, then why are we having this conversation? Because I really don't care how they skin the cat. I don't care how they organize. I care about the results. If it's excellent, why are we even having this hearing?
But I think that, you know, there are situations where the care or things go awry, and every veteran's health should have that same experience. So I think that's why we're here today, for the exceptions, because all veterans' experiences aren't the same.
My perception is very different. My perception isn't that these cases of bad performance and bad service aren't the exception. I think they're too often the rule. But I'll, you know, that's you're representing veterans, and you know your veterans, and so, but I'm surprised that we're talking about an exception, that we're spending all this time, that we've done all these studies, because I've read at least 5 studies on organizational management. I care about organizational results, and if they're great, then what are we doing here? Do you think they're great, Mr. Missel?
I think that a number of the issues we've identified is because people haven't done their job and that they don't have the structure in place to ensure that there's accountability.
One of my favorite quotes is that you're either coaching it or allowing it to happen. I think you can overcome organizational structures. I think you can overcome bad systems. I think leadership, I think culture dominate on the outcome. And I think there are real, fundamental, deep-seated cultural problems. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that? At the VA, I'm asking you, Mr. Missel. You're the independent inspector general. I want an independent assessment. Do you think there's a cultural problem at the VHA?
In many of the instances that we've looked at, we've seen a cultural problem where people aren't taking responsibility to do the right thing, not performing as they should be, which results in significant problems.
So it's not just the Washington Medical Center. Do you think it's systemic, or is that just an isolated event?
We've obviously seen more than just problems at DC. We've seen them at a number of facilities. Obviously, when either information comes to our attention or through our proactive efforts we find it, we address them as quickly.
We were talking about how we're going to have a management for performance plan for VISNs, and how we're going to define roles and responsibilities and bring clarity to something that is clearly chaotic and unclear. And Mr. Gamble, you mentioned that the network directors are taking the lead on developing these sort of plans. Did I hear you correctly?
That they're part of the process, sir.
But why? I get it. I mean, get input from your mid-management, your regional directors, if you will. But I mean, they're looking to the leadership of the VHA to tell them what their mission is. Clearly, they don't know what their mission is. What is expected of them? How will they be graded? What's the scorecard look like? Will they be rewarded if they do a good job? Will they be fired if they don't do a good job? Why are we asking them to run off and develop a plan for themselves?
Ms. Congressman.
What's the plan, Dr. Clancy, for developing these this sort of strategic management plan for the VISN so that they get it right, they serve our veterans, they're safe, they're happy, they're healthy, and we did right by our heroes? What's the plan?
That is what you just described. It will ultimately be deemed by central leadership, period.
Do we have a problem with central leadership? How long have you been, how long has the undersecretary job been unfilled?
By a permanent political employee since February of 17.
I know my time's expired, Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, because I don't feel like I've gotten all my questions asked or answered, but that's my fault. So I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me, I have a couple, let me just start a second round then. We have only 3 of us here, so let's just go with a second round if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you very much. And just to pick up where my colleague left off, I will say that I've been in Congress for 5.5 years, and a number of us on committee came in the class of 2012, starting in January of 13. We are now on our 4th veteran secretary, VA secretary, since I have arrived in Congress. And so I think that that is part of the situation, to be honest. And I'm not trying to be partisan. I want to work together in a bipartisan way, as our committee does, but we need leadership from the top. And so I just want to revisit the details one last time here of New Hampshire and VISN 1. I do have the letter from the U.S. Office of Special Counsel dated January 25, 2018 that I would like to submit for the record that lays out the situation that we had and, frankly, the lack of leadership and the lack of supervision. If I could enter that for the record.
Objection.
Thank you very much. The other person that was a focus for us was the director of VISN 1, Dr. Mayo Smith. And again, I'd have to ask you, when did Dr. Mayo Smith first become aware of our referral to the Office of Special Counsel? And did he ever pass his concerns up to central office officials? Because I think that was part of the breakdown for us. Not only did we not get from the medical director to the VISN, we didn't get from the VISN to the central office, again, until this all played out in the Boston Globe. And this was despite our best efforts to take it to the OIG, take it to the Office of Special Counsel, push forward what was happening in Washington and in Boston in the 6 months in between.
So at headquarters, we became aware of the special counsel and the whistleblower allegations when they turned to us for assistance after the Inspector General was not able to step up at that point. And this is a routine occurrence. I'm not singling them out. And I would guess that that was February or March of 17, and then the Office of Medical Inspector went up and had a preliminary report that was sent to the Office of Special Counsel, I want to say late May of 17, and the whistleblowers, and this is all part of the process, were not completely comfortable with the results. And I think, as you know, Congresswoman, we then did a much more extensive review of cases and have consulted directly with Dr. Coyce and others.
Well, and after it was in the Boston Globe, the Secretary Shulkin showed up virtually the next day. So, I mean, we did eventually get the attention. But one of the problems I have is when General Bergman and I held this Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee hearing in New Hampshire. I mean, that's our role. We have oversight. Dr. Mayo Smith didn't appear to be fully aware of the concerns, even at that point. That was after Dr. Shulkin had come up, and he was, well, I think if General Bergman was here with me, he would say we received unsatisfactory answers regarding the actions taken to rectify the situation. So. I won't beat a dead horse, as they say where I come from, but I do think we need to focus on supervision at each level and the role of oversight and how to bring concerns forward, and it sounds as though that's the direction. I don't know if our witness from OIG has anything more to add about that, what we can do in terms of both streamlining the process and the types of people that we hired that will be focused on supervision and will be focused on continuous improvement. So for Mr. Missel.
Yes, I don't know if I have that much more to add. I do want to say, though, with respect to whistleblowers, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that they feel comfortable coming to see us and talk to us about issues. Like, we do protect their anonymity if they so desire, And a good example is the Washington, D.C. matter. We got an anonymous complaint from a person at VA, and we've been able to protect that person's confidentiality. And the more situations we have like that, hopefully VA employees and others will feel comfortable that if they come to us, they'll be protected, they'll be heard, and appropriate action will be taken.
And I appreciate that because that's a concern that I have. I continue to have whistleblowers come, and in the case that I've been talking about today, there was a long period of delay because the whistleblowers were concerned about their anonymity. Dr. Coyce is a physician in the facility and wanted to continue to do his work. So we have passed legislation out of this committee to address whistleblower protection, and I'll yield back, but I want to thank again Dr. Rowe for holding this hearing, and I think our oversight role is significant and we take it very seriously in a bipartisan way, and I appreciate you coming forward. Thank you.
Mr. Harrington, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I really appreciate you extending this for a second round. Because I have this general frustration, and I know my colleagues feel the same, and I can't imagine how the veterans must feel because, you know, you talked about how you would have been fired for some of these things, and the reason you'd have been fired is because the health system you worked for would go out of business if they let you continue to do this thing. But the VA won't go out of business, and that's a fundamental challenge to breed this sort of culture of accountability without those external competitive forces. It's just really difficult. It's really difficult. And on top of that, I think Ms. Custer's right. I mean, the political leadership is a key link in the chain of accountability up to us. Without them, I mean, I feel sometimes a little guilty for beating on you guys, but y'all are part of the problem and the opportunity. But without the continuity and political leadership, and I don't know if that's the Senate that's not working to get them through or if it's the administration not putting them up, but it is really, really frustrating. And I think you're going to get this sentiment as long as we have these gaps and the disconnects in the accountability chain. Ms. Clancy, how would you rank order the VISNs? If I just said rank order the VISNs from the best to the worst, could you do that for me? Could you submit that to the chairman and the committee?
I'd be happy to. And I agree.
Does that exist today?
I could look at a number of different dimensions, and respectfully, I would want to submit that for all of the problems you hear about in general, either we don't do enough of a job, or if it bleeds, it leads.
Sure. I know there
we
are
don't
good people.
share the people who are doing well.
Here's my thing. I know there are good people who are well-meaning and they want it to work. I think the system is fundamentally flawed. I think we have a lot to overcome. I think we have to do our job better. I think you have to do your job better. But let's get back to this idea of rank order.
Yes.
That supposes there's a scorecard. So there's a scorecard for the VISNs.
Yes.
And I'd like a copy. Would you submit a copy to the chairman and the committee so we can see what their performance metrics are?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because that should be pretty clear then. If they have outcome measures that they know they have to meet, what happens if they don't meet those outcome measures?
Then they have some serious conversations with their boss. And
When's the last time the seriousness got to a removal because they just were not serving the veterans and they just consistently missed the mark on outcomes?
I've had a couple of direct experiences in the past couple of years, and it wasn't an up or out kind of thing. It was like, no, there's no way you would get a recruitment and retention incentive if the performance in your network is not helping and that person left.
The Veterans Integrated Service Network is what VISN stands for. I find it very ironic. I feel like it should be named the Veterans Siloed, Aimless, Unaccountable Service Network. That's my perception. Mm-hmm. That's my takeaway from reading this, from listening to you guys. What is the VHA central role versus the role of the VISN in managing these medical centers and holding them accountable for serving our veterans? Is it clear, or is there overlap? Is there confusion at that level as well?
There has been confusion at times, which is why we're working on clarity, and you absolutely cannot have a clear plan and roadmap for VISNs unless we've got that straight. In general, central office is going to set vision and strategy and tactics and make sure that there are resources available. If some facilities need more, then they should get that, or some networks and so forth. And frankly, for identifying the right kind of leadership, because I agree with you that leadership and culture are way, way at the top.
It seems to me that they're not laboratories of innovation, they're laboratories of inefficiency, and they will continue to be until they're held accountable, until there's clarity in their mission, until they're held accountable for their performance. And I don't, I sit through a lot of hearings on IT systems especially, and how there's so much frittered away on trying to do something internally when you can get it off the shelf. One VISN's doing it one way, the other's VISN's doing it a different way, even though it may be working and they could share best practices. I'm out of time, but I'm going to continue to press in on this notion of accountability, and I hope we get more political leadership in so we can have these same discussions. Mr. Chairman, you've been very generous and very patient. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. At this time, Ms. Custer, do you have any closing comments?
Just very briefly, I do want to, make that comment that we do need leadership from the top, and frankly, we need some consistency over a period of time. I mean, 4 secretaries, and I've only been here for 5 years, it seems a little, we're churning through VA secretaries. So I hope that the President will appoint and the Senate will confirm the Secretary in due course, and we'll be able to move forward with our oversight role. I think accountability, you're hearing this message in a bipartisan way. The role of supervision and the role of oversight is critically important, and we'll continue to work together. So thank you, Dr. Rowe, and appreciate you scheduling this hearing, and thank you again for accommodating me.
Yes. Thank you all, and I want to thank the committee members for being here today. And I have just one quick question. Dr. Shulkin wanted to have a planning on VISN reorganization done by July 1st. Is that still going to happen without the leadership?
Yes.
It is going.
Yes.
So July 1st, we'll have that.
Well, we will present that to the department leadership, but shortly thereafter, we'd look forward to briefing you on this.
Good. Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Clancy. And I think you sense frustration, but opportunity here with, I think the OIG is laid out a very clear pathway about how we should go forward. And I think Mr. Moulton brought up something that I, again, had a question earlier, was what's 23 doing that 1, 5, and 22 are not doing? And that should be pretty simple inside. And it's still unclear to me, if I'm a VISN director, what power I have. If something's going, in other words, if I'm sitting in the VISN in Nashville, what power do I have over Mountain Home Medical Center in Johnson City, Tennessee? It's not clear to me, even after today's hearing, what I have. Could I go and would I be instrumental in removing a poorly performing medical center director? Or
Yes.
would I not? I
Yes,
could.
you would.
Could I
Yes.
fire them?
Yes.
So as
And
a VISN director, I can fire a medical center without checking with you and the secretary.
I think in general, they would check and make us aware, but yes. And when I have called that VISN director to say I was hearing things from a particular facility, she's cheerfully cut her vacation short to go spend a day or two there to figure out what's going on, so she can see it herself, which is exactly
Well, do all
what
these
you
VISN
want.
directors understand that they have that authority and power, and do the medical center directors understand my boss is right here, not all the way to central office in Washington, D.C., but I've got a boss close by that can terminate me. They do understand that.
Yes.
Has it ever happened?
Yes.
Has a VISN director's fired a medical center director?
Yes.
Can you tell me who that is, or where? Maybe we'll do that off the record.
Yeah, I could.
I'll prefer to do that off the record.
Okay,
just to
that would
see
be
if that's
fine.
Happened. Well, anyway, I want to thank you all. It's been helpful. I think you see the committee wants to. I think legislation last week, 14 bills we passed yesterday, 11 of them by unanimous consent. Voice voted, and 3 by, I don't think there was a single or 2 or 3 no votes yesterday on all those bills. So you have a committee and a Congress that really wants VA to work. We truly do. We thank the IG for helping us point out these problems. And Mr. Butler, as always, thank you for the members and the VSOs who always tremendously helpful to us and guiding us on the committee. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. Without objection, so ordered. Hearing is adjourned.